Hello world of YouTube and welcome to the listening log update for September of 2024. I have 12 new albums that I spun over the last month that I'll be talking about in this video with time codes. As always, listed out in the description if you'd like to click around the video to each individual review. There was a handful of catch-up that I decided to dive into, some soundtracks of games that I've been spending my time with that I felt the need to talk about this month, along with some other new albums that I was also very anticipated for. Give it a like as always if you're excited, and let's go ahead and dive on in.
Freaky little, sneaky little, creepy little whack bitch, creeping on me, speaking on me, sleeping on me, mattress. Now I got
something I did this month, not intentionally, but was an interesting sort of trend I noticed in the rear view when I was pulling together the records I spun over the last month, was that I followed artists I had seen popping off on TikTok into checking out records that they had been promoting recently. It's like a third of the records I spun this month, and starting with newest TDE signee, or one of the newer TDE signees, Doechii, with her debut mixtape, Aligator Bites Never Heal. Nissan Altima, the song that was popping off, is a great showcasing of her talents. Her flow is incredible on there, and she paints a verse to get you hype, and her energy is met at 10. But she honestly showcases like an artist with some real vision, style, scope to her artistry. And I think that on this mixtape, by and large, she really comes to bat with a good sort of full picture. She talks about more introspection with a good sense of humor on like Denial is a River, and a little bit on like Death Roll. She goes, like, she chops it up hard on like Catfish and on Bullfrog, where she sort of confronts, froggy people that she's met on her come up. She has some hook-driven stuff in there as well, like on Boiled Peanuts. I like this by and large. Like, I think that there's a lot of good stuff here. I like the personality-driven stuff too, like Boom Bap. I thought that Boom Bap was like a really, just a fun sort of like moment of brevity amidst some of the moments that the record had going on. And I think that it leads well into Nissan Altima and its stretch after that. I think that the mixtape definitely starts a bit stronger than it sort of rounds out, but I think that by and large this is still a really good record, and I think that, like, as far as a fun, dynamic listen in a hip-hop scope, there's a lot of really good stuff here. I'm very curious to see where she takes herself from here, and I hope that she does more ambitious stuff as far as like conceptualizing on a project, because I like a lot of what she's got going on, and I really want to see, I'm curious to see what distance she could take that. I'm giving this a 7. I think that it's really, really good. I think that it's got a lot of fun ideas that, like, in a year where hip-hop has definitely like been on a huge upswing, I think is a fun sort of like newer face to see with some real energy.
Wrote you about 1,000 letters that I'll never send.
Laila is another in the trend that I followed this month of artists I had heard on TikTok and finally checking out a full-length release of theirs that they happen to be releasing this year. And through Gap Year, there were the songs like that, and specifically Not My Problem, that I had heard cropping up on my For You page. But I really like Not My Problem. Out of that, like, really slim, straightforward, just very catchy, small pop song, I think that's the hook is simple but very effective. And if I were to describe this album in that same sort of breath, it would be that it is very straightforward but effective at capturing a mood. I was shocked to learn, very tangential, that Laila's actually Yazine Bey's daughter. You guys know probably, I'm a big fan of his work under Mos Def, and I love the stuff that he still does under Yazine Bey, and that got me more curious about Gap Year. And I will say that, like, on the other side, I can see talent there. I think that Laila has a really good voice, and I think making these very intimate, very minimal electronic, R&B jams helps enhance that sort of adolescent feel that this record has going on. But I think that while there is a focus in tone, that lack of direction weighs the album down more than it does help it. I do like some of the through lines that are here. Like, I like the interludes and how that, in tandem with, like, the opening talent show, really set the stage of intimacy and youthfulness on top of that. You know, the very, like, actually recorded at the show feel helps cement the listener in this world of adolescence. You know, these lyrics of talking about being in this relationship or having, you know, relationships amidst things like tests and homework. You know, it's very, like, very teenage in its approach, but I think that time and continued sort of honing will do nothing but wonders for Laila. She has an artistic ear already there, and she has a good, you know, handling of production. The shit sounds clean. You know, there's pockets of this remind me of, like, some of the sort of very personal-driven stuff from, like, Solange on her last duology, but it's just not as focused. And that's fine. It's still a very solid album at the end of the day. I think the inclusion of things like interludes with this songwriting approach that's very direct in the, like, vein of, like, TikTok-centric sounds kind of creates a really weird, janky listen. But I mean, I still think there's some solid stuff here. I'm giving it like a 6. What's catchy is still really catchy. The soundscape is still well realized, and there's some good musicality here, and I can see a lot of talent here that I think with more nurturing or with just general experimentation will do nothing but positive things, potentially. There's a lot of promise here, and I like this debut. And I'll definitely be coming back to definitely some of the highlights that I wouldn't be surprised if you see some mention of by the year's end. I kind of teased some of my opinion on this new Boston Manor album Sundiver in my Redacted for its sister record Doechii last month. And while that's not only because I think that the band is doing a little bit more sonically diverse on Sundiver that makes it a more fruitful experience, they're also maintaining the mood from Doechii and the emotion from that record while exploring other sonic ideas under this umbrella that I think makes it a more captivating spin. You know, I really loved some of the singles leading up to this, like Container. I think that the guitars on that and throughout parts of like Heat Me Up and Fornix, while maybe not always staying heavy, remind me of like early Deftones in the best way possible. And I mean like Adrenaline era Deftones, like that raw, really aggressive shit. And I like that they sort of morph that into other realms, like on the sounds of Why I Sleep. And I like how they blend or on the opener Doechii Dawn, or how they find ways to pivot into other realms, like the instrumental electronic sort of pensive, if not kind of unnerving, of Morning Star, or the overt, just swaggery groove throughout Dissolve. There's a lot of good ideas in the pot here that I think make for a good extension of that sort of internal conflict and helps showcase a bit more of that potential scattershot mindset that's wrought out from some of the ideas of Doechii. I don't think every song necessarily knocks it out of the park, but I do think that as far as like providing a record that is not only a great companion, but overall a step up in showcasing your talents and showing your own proverbial adaptation of influences into your own. I think that Sundiver is a great piece for the band. I think that it's easily one of their best records, or at least one of my personal favorites that they've dropped so far in their career. I like that they've kept this more accessible-driven, hook-driven stuff throughout parts of their record, while also concocting just some pure heat woven throughout the record on top of that. I think this record's really strong. I think it's easily one of my favorite records in its lane from this year, and I'm going to be giving it an 8 out of 10. Really strong stuff. I think if you like Boston Manor and you haven't spun this yet, you should absolutely spin Sundiver. It's a great end of the summer record more than it is like a beginning of fall record, but it kind of fits that mood that Doechii had, which was released in a time where I feel like it was good for this sort of seasonal transition, and it helps cement that transition pretty strongly, in my opinion.
When I walk in the room, everybody agrees something's added to the air, but
another in the echelon of stuff from TikTok that I spun this month. The Dare's What's Wrong with New York. An artist whose song, Girls, pretty alright. I think it's, again, like a lot of the good TikTok I spin, good but simple but effective. Straightforward but effective. You know, it's meant to be immediately infectious, and it kind of does its job well, better than other stuff of its ilk. What I like about this record is where it takes that same energy, that same, like, immediate indie sleaze, like, broken down into a good little fucking bite-sized Snickers bar, and does it differently, but, like, under the same umbrella. Like, on the opener, Open Up, a great fucking song, in my opinion. The Swagger Amidst Perfume, also fantastic. I kind of wish there was more of that, but, like, not even just in the quantity of songs, but, like, the length of the songs. I know that, like, the whole thing is, like, that's it. It's, like, it's the concentrated dose. And this is, like, a Pocket Project's length. It's 22 minutes. But, like, the beauty of some of the records that, like, this album is very much inspired by, like your LCD Sound Systems, and even, like, the Rapture, anything that, like, James Murphy had his fingers in, are those moments where, like, the band really take the sonic palette and kind of, like, try to go the distance with it. You know, like, fucking This Is Happening's one of, like, best moments is a song that's, like, over 10 minutes long. So, like, this record definitely gets the sound, but not necessarily the full focus, which is its biggest problem. And also, some of those moments that really try to capture the sound don't necessarily do it in a way that I think is all that good. Like, You're Invited is fine, but if you're gonna have Open Up on your record, you can leave You're Invited on the cutting room floor. Also, I Destroyed Disco treads that line, but doesn't quite cross the finish line. And I like that this moment kind of has a resolve, but, like, it feels like way too soon. It was like watching Baby Driver all over again, when the parts of the movie just started to sort of blink through. It's like, whoa, okay, damn, stakes really are there. This record definitely kind of feels the same way, which is also kind of shocking, given that this album is meant to celebrate a high, but this high is not all that long. The more I stew with this record, the more the shallowness really starts to echo out to me in some ways that I kind of feel a little let down by. I liked its highs, but I kind of wish there was more on the plate. I'm giving this a 5. Very solid, alright approach to this, but misses some of those, like, core ideas that really shape a record like this and elevate it to a level that I think is truly where this record is trying to be at times.
The message in the chorus, you bastards got nothing for us. The overlord is the Ross. I ain't talking about a rental car when I'm pulling the Taurus.
While I've had a lot of love for an artist like Nas for adapting and evolving his style as an older rapper with a newer producer, I also love when a legacy act just does that legacy justice with another solid outing. And LL Cool J's The Force is absolutely an example of that. Being this pairing of his brand of fundamental ass, but still well done rapping, with Q-Tip's personality-driven production, and the way that he weaves himself into hooks of these songs to act as a sort of companion to LL, creates a similar relationship as the one I described with Nas and Hit Boy, but both feel very bridging of worlds of sorts. Both were from similar eras of hip-hop. Q-Tip almost seems like he came like a step after LL, but both had monumental impact on the ensuing decade of the 90s, and I like that LL spends this track listing mostly just kind of chopping it up, showing his pen game is still as fruitful as ever, while having moments to pivot into more socially driven stuff like the title track, or on 30 Decembers, where he sort of reflects on his time back during COVID, when it was at its, like, peak within the public consciousness, while also having moments where he still breaks it down for the ladies in true LL fashion, like on Proclivities with Saweetie. And I like that he does not only just collabs with dudes of his era that he may have inspired after the fact, like Fat Joe on Saturday Night Special, even if he's not my favorite feature on that track, or Huey in the Chair, and Murder Graham Do with Busta Rhymes and Eminem, respectively, or even Nas on Praise Him. All are some great, you know, collabs of legacy with legacy, just matching each other's energy, and feel like artist fulfillment to a degree. But I enjoy some of the other features, like I said, Saweetie on Proclivities, or even Sona on Black Code Suite. I think that there's just a lot of good in there's a lot of good in this melting pot of ideas that creates a really solid release on the other side. I think that as far as, like, also just a consistent instrumental palette, Q-Tip really creates a good companion for LL's bars, and I think that by and large, if you like hip-hop, there's a lot of really good stuff here, especially if you're a fan of older stuff, because it is very much old school, but I think that there's still some good shit here. I want to give this a 7. I don't think it's gonna necessarily move the needle intensely throughout the next couple of months, but I think that there's a lot of good stuff here that I'm happy to see in a year where hip-hop is definitely being much more upfront and out there. I like to see other artists, other older artists like LL, still come to bat with some good shit at the end of the day. You know, I got a lot of love for my subscribers that don't really watch my gaming stuff, because that is definitely something that takes more precedent, partially because it's like a visual thing, but also because, like, when it comes to listening to music, it's a wholly different experience than, like, playing a game. But the musical component of gaming is something that sometimes bleeds into these reviews, and there's a couple game soundtracks from games that I spun, or played, I guess I should say, this month that I branched out to and listened to outside of just playing the game. Partially because, in one instance, it was a great backdrop for a great game, and the other, which will be happening later on, is a game that I purely kept playing until I got sick of because the soundtrack fucking ripped. The former, Crow Country, is a game that I will be talking about later on in the year, but is a great time. You should absolutely play it. And Ockeroid's soundtrack really helps push the horror, tragedy, and mystery behind this period piece wrapped in this very morbidly disturbing theme park. It takes place in the early 90s, and while that doesn't necessarily play a driving force in some of the sounds, it does to some degree because of inspiration that I also really appreciate. But, like, the main theme, the Welcome to Crow Country on the soundtrack, is absolutely, like, the early 90s is absolutely the early 90s in, like, a bottle. That horn sound alone is just, like, the 90s. But things like the synth choice in, like, I Am Not Alone, it very much leans into, like, what horror media was like to some degree in the early 90s. And I really appreciate that. The same can be said for, like, the swirling organ of Fairy Tale Town. It very much evokes uneasiness and sort of a disturbed feeling on top of this, like, nostalgia deep within my mind's eye. You know, and the things like the strings on, like, the lawyer song, or, like, the subtle piece beneath Maybe Everything Will Be Okay. There's just a really good use of sound on this that I think it makes it stand out as a soundtrack. In a year where I've heard a lot of really good soundtracks too. Not only has it been a great year for gaming in a certain lane, it has been a great year for gaming soundtracks, and this is absolutely another notch in that belt. I'm giving this an 8 out of 10. I could see that getting more so if I found myself replaying the game, which I plan on doing soon, and really letting the music further sink me into this just disturbing-ass, creepy world. Play Crow Country. It's short, sweet, and a damn good spooky time.
Goodbye to the guy I used to be.
So the big difference between, like, pop soul duo Lawrence and the rest of the third of this review of TikTok excursions I've done is that this Family Business is Lawrence's, like, 5th outing if you include their number of contributions to the Christmas movie Noel's soundtrack, which makes some of this record make a little more sense. Because, like, I know that we're on this wave of, like, 2000s nostalgia, but there's some pockets of this that don't necessarily tap into the nostalgia in the same way, and more feels like a group sort of trying to respin some older ideas back into the sort of pop conversation. Not in a bad way. I do like some of the highs that this record does reach. Like, I think the opener, What You Want, is a good electrifying intro, even if its verses are a little all over the place. Its chorus is fucking awesome. So much so that they play it, like, to the nth degree. But, like, there's other moments on here that, like, where the hook is just immaculate and they kind of reach this great harmony across the whole track, like on Hip Replacement. That song, they make that a single, probably one of the best singles to come out in 2024. That song is so straightforward but effective at doing what it does well. And a lot of this record, as far as like the production is considered and the sounds are considered, a lot of it's alright. I enjoy these two's sort of musical ear. I think that they and the creators they work with just have a good arrangement. You know, they do really good with horns and organs and the like. That Tapestry carries some of the album's weaker moments, but also enriches some of those highs that I've been going on. Like the horn solo that has that chopped to production on Hip Replacement is choice as hell, and I think that like that Tapestry does elevate some of What You Want over the edge in a way that I really enjoy. But like, solid ass jam, but like 80% of that is its soundscape, right? Not necessarily in a completely negative way, but it is one of the weaker immediate moments out the door. I also think Guy I Used to Be is like a pretty solidly written jam that just like sounds like 2015 nostalgia in the wildest way. I listen to that song and I think of like My Job in 2015 from a band I've never heard of until recently. Lawrence is also a group that like one of my coworkers listens to and we had been talking about, and I made like a weird connection when looking more into them and realizing they were the same band. But like, there are other pockets where this record really tries to dive into other sonic ideas within this pop soul nostalgia twist. Like on the intimate I'm Confident That I'm Insecure, that I think reaches a really nice crescendo. And I think it's a moment where the vocalist Gracie really shows off her talents in ways that are different than some of the flashy stuff that I think she does well in a lot of this. But like, I really enjoy that moment as a whole. And like the sort of couple of moments in the end where they really lean into the familial side, like Funeral and Through Conflict Resolution, is a really good resolve for this record. But like moments like that nugget of like Promotion in 23 where it feels like 2010's nostalgia like 6 years too early just really stick out in this record in a way that I don't enjoy. I like a lot that's here, but there's some parts that are underbaked, some parts that feel like wild to hear in 2024, and some genuinely good shit on display. I'm giving this a 6. It's a solid ass record that in an era where like funk is really popping off has some good moments. It's similar to the soundtrack to a game that I'll talk about later on in this review. Just makes me want to like dive deeper into its genre to the stuff that I more enjoy than this. It's a good like warm up to a sound if you're wanting like a good warm up to a listening session, but you'll end up with some favorites that you'll enjoy more than this on the other side of your excursions.
Lands we brung hands as ammunition. I plan my death before I plan submission.
The irony of Ka dropping The Thief Next to Jesus last month is that I was going to do a redacted on Ka's duology from 2022, Woeful Studies and Language Arts, that I ended up shelving just because Not only did Sundiver also come out that month, and Doechii felt like the more obvious record in needing of kind of a fine-tuning, but Ka is just one of those artists that I wish I talked about more, because he is great at conceptualizing, bridging parallels between that concept and the poetic metaphors he's trying to spin, and just having this really sharp pen game with good instrumental choice on top of all of that. And The Thief Next to Jesus is another album in that echelon. It almost feels like a companion piece to his 2020 album Descendants of Cain, where he sort of draws these biblical parallels and the grandiosity and the portrayal of Christ into his own strifes. And I think that The Thief Next to Jesus tries to, like, further extend some of those allegories, but in a much more intimate sense, a la what he was kind of doing with the sample choice and gritty production weaving across that duology that I think creates a good blending of both prospects. Things like what feel like the opening communion on Bread, Wine, Body, Blood, or the whirling organ throughout Borrowed Time that gives way to this soulful, almost interlude of Collection Plate, just help set the stage and carry the pseudo-narrative of sermon that Ka is kind of weaving on here. I really enjoy a lot of what he pens. I think that the tragedy and the personalized tragedy on top of that, that feels what brings it back to that world of community that I sort of talked about throughout the duology, loving throughout the duology on tracks like Cross to Bear or Untested Testimony and Soul and Spirit. All service, mood, themes, and all that. And I think this record is another great testament to Ka's artistry. I think that if you really respect somebody's pen game and conceptualization for a record and you haven't spun Ka, I don't know if Thief Next to Jesus is a great starting point, but any record of Ka's kind of has this same flavor, just with different, you know, accents across that flavor. And there's really not much wrong I have to say with this project. I think that it's strong. I think that it's easily another just great notch in a year where artists in hip-hop are just really dropping some incredible releases. I'm torn on where to put this. Part of me wants to put it at a 9, part of me wants to put it at an 8. I'm going to set it at an 8 for now. We'll see if it grows any intensity throughout the next couple of months. It's at least going to stay at an 8, but that's kind of my constant. You know, people talk about artists like Denzel being like hip-hop's constant in the critical scope, but I think Ka really is that, because the guy just never misses. The guy always comes to play with a lot of things to say, and I think he always does so very eloquently. And this is another example of that. You know, when I got into Jamie XX 9 years ago with the release of his solo debut In Color, I didn't know I'd be waiting so long for this follow-up In Waves. However, I do enjoy where he sort of evolved his harnessing of mood and sound on this record a hell of a lot. As far as still keeping that balance of high-energy dance floor anthems and the more intimate stuff, I think creates a really good cocktail on here with another round of collaborators that really enrich those ideas tenfold. I really enjoy the vibrant tracks like Baddie on the Floor and Life or Treat Each Other Right, which just make me want to just hit the floor with the most energy possible. But I think that, like, the XX reunion on Waited All Night and Still Summer and even Breather help dissect from some of that overt high energy pretty well, in my opinion. I even like the sort of resolve the album finds itself in with Falling Together. I think that the road over those couple of tracks between isn't necessarily the best, and I also don't really enjoy the collaboration Daffodil quite as much as some of the others on here, but I think that by the hit ratio on here is still strong as hell. I do think that I would have loved to have seen more from him in the interim, but I love this collection of tracks almost as much as In Color. We'll see if in time I find myself keeping as much of this on rotation as I have In Color. But I think as far as like creating a great collection of jams to help send the summer into the sunset with over the last month. I think In Waves is definitely that great end of the summer rager that the dance scene kind of felt like it needed, especially after a year where the club felt like the biggest point of focus for some aspects in music. I think this is really strong, honestly. I really like a lot of the ideas. I think that some of it kind of falls apart, but by the by, it's as consistent as I was hoping it would be at the very least. I'm giving this an 8 out of 10. Still a really strong album from Jamie. This Voidz record is some half-baked garbo. Like, I really enjoyed Virtues, the last Voidz album, which was my introduction to this sort of offshoot of Julian Casablancas' creative energy. Really electrified me. Had some really great dynamic ideas that, like, try to get also representation on here, but due to, like, lackluster production, just production that feels not all finished in a lot of instances. Like, what the fuck is up with the vocals on Square Wave? Or the drums versus the guitar mixing on, like, Prophecy of the Dragon? This feels like the raw demos done by a band, like, in the initial conceptualization stages of writing music. Like, sure, it's still got these, like, fun genre pivots like the aforementioned Prophecy of the Dragon, which has this, like, 80s ass-inspired metal guitar, but again, just feels so flat in this wonky-ass mix. It's a real deviation from, like, the vibey Flexorcist, which has this, like, reverb-soaked sort of synth sound with these drums that completely fight against these pads like they're daggers stabbing into sheets, breezing in the wind. And that's one of the songs that I think is one of the most balanced in the mix, mind you. And I really like the sort of, like, synthy backdrop of, like, 7 Horses, but, like, some of that percussion and that vocoder, which, don't even get me started on the vocals on this. Like, I talked about them being ambiguous in Square Wave, but, like, is Julian alright? He sounds like he's half interested in what he's doing throughout half of Perseverance, and it's an oddity, honestly. This record is a real shame. It's a disappointment for me. Easily one of the worst albums I've heard this year. And not even in the ways that it's, like, entertaining to like, be shocked at. It's just like looking at a stain on the floor left by your cat who just happened to eat a little too much when he got, you know, excited that he was getting a little special treat today. I'm getting sidetracked. This record's not good. I really was let down by and large. And to see that go against a completely different controversy is insane to me. Almost makes me curious to dive further into the overlap of, like, artistry and AI. Because there's really only been one instance I can think of where, like, an artist had AI's involvement and it did not flounder for them. It ended up being one of the best records in their career thus far. But it is an outlier amidst at least this and some growing other instances of this happening. Again, sidetracked in a completely different tangent. This album sucks. It's getting a 2 out of 10. So not worth it. Really just a baffling oddity by and large. Now, Stellar Blade was the other game in question I talked about when, like, games that I played this month with soundtracks I was going to talk about in this segment. While there are other games that I am playing whose soundtracks I also like, I plan on playing those games to the end. I'm not going to finish Stellar Blade. I have finished its soundtrack, and, like, Shift Up really carries this game, in my opinion. I know that the game has fans, and I think that, like, it definitely taps into what it's going for pretty alright, but it makes me, similarly to the album Lawrence I talked about earlier in the video, want to just play other games like Stellar Blade that I think are just better games. I thought it was an interesting excursion, and I'm not going to talk about the game at any other point, so I'll talk about the game here before I really go ham on the music, because there's like 10 hours of music here, and a lot of it pops the fuck off. But the game was fine. If you like a good hack and slash, and you want to see that style tried to be pushed into the worlds of a roguelike, I honestly think you should play Another Crab's Treasure. But Stellar Blade is honestly, like, I get what it's trying to do. I just don't think it does it well enough for me to want to keep diving into it. Plus, it got really derivative in some ways that I thought were just hilarious. I watched The Matrix Reloaded because of Stellar Blade. But again, I'm getting sidetracked. Shift Up soundtrack is really fucking good. Not only is it a good electronic soundtrack, its production, you know, blends these, like, dramatic strings with these great electronic backbeats that very much evokes, like, pop scopes that were very much popping off in parts of the 2000s especially, and, like, where parts of, like, J-pop and the like have gone. But I really appreciate that the budget that not only went into the visuals did go into making this large-scale soundtrack to match the biblical themes that were being tackled in the game. You know, a lot of the battle music was just amped as fuck, and I love the clean production that lets those synths just really carry while the blades are swinging. I also really appreciated the moments where it sort of toned it down. You know, some of the zone themes had a good mixture of, like, intensity and sort of, like, just relaxing, good background tapestry. Things like the safe area theme, similarly to Crow's Country, were just really chill in a way that was infectious. You know, the melody work was catchy when it needed to be on the soundtrack. There was just a really good coming together of ideas on here. And again, if I liked the game more, I probably would honestly like the soundtrack more, but it's a moment where I feel like there's enough really good shit here that I feel like if you like this type of music, you could probably find an album's worth of stuff to pull from it and make for your own good listening experience. I like this a lot. It's amp, it's chill, it's a good, well-produced batch of songs that I'm teetering between a 7 or an 8 on. I want to give it an 8 because I really like the music, and it carried a game that is easily one of my least favorite I played this year. Much longer than I probably would have normally if the music wasn't as good, which is part of the reason why, and I think the reason why, the like catalytic reason why I am going to land with this at a 7, because unlike something like Ockeroid's Crow Country soundtrack, I actually think I would listen to more of that just randomly when I was wanting, like, ambient music in the background. And while I like some parts of this, and I will definitely seek out parts of this or put parts of this in playlists involving, like, high energy electronics and even some of the chill stuff, I think that there's some of it that I just don't think works as well potentially on its own as a song, more so than just a piece of the soundtrack, you know what I mean? And those were my reviews. Did you agree? Did you disagree with my thoughts? Let me know those, and any albums from this year you'd like for me to check out in this particular segment in the comments down below. Again, if you'd like this video, give it a like. If you want to see more, consider subscribing. I drop 2 to 4 vids a week depending on what I've got going on. Thank you again so very much for watching. I'm Devour Rack. You guys have good insights and situations, and I'll see you another day.